Maybe I was supposed to do it.
Oh.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that we've covered then so far. One of the topics we've talked about is determinism, right? And we've said that's the thesis that you don't have any free will. Every action you take is sort of governed by all of these, the initial state of the universe, okay? The previous state of the universe before. So we had a couple of arguments for determinism. This was one of them. This is the argument from hard determinism, which says, you're made of atoms or you're made of some fundamental symbol, and symbols don't make choices. Symbols are governed by the laws of the universe, and so therefore so are your choices. All right, so you can analyse that argument. You can offer a few critiques of it. You can investigate it. The second argument we looked at for determinism was the one from desire, which says, any action you do because you want to do it. But you don't get to choose what you want. All right? And so the conclusion that follows, you don't get to choose what you do. You don't have any choice in your action. Now, I've got some YouTube links here from when we did them in the lesson as well, so you can use that as a resource. So I'm going through these. You're going to pick one of these arguments, only one, all right, and build up a case for it and offer a few critiques or sort of try and build up the strongest argument of it you possibly can. Here's a new one that we haven't talked about that I just feel like mentioning in passing. It's something we can discuss, right? When we've talked about God, we've talked about properties of God. One of them is omniscience. That means being all-knowing, okay? And so you can have an argument for determinism from that, all right? Can you read that for me, Joe?
If God knows how you are going to act, then you don't have free will. But if God knows how you are going to act, you do not have free will.
Very good. So a valid modus ponens saying if God knows everything, he knows exactly what you're going to do. All right? And according to classical philosophy, God has all powers, he has all knowledge, he knows exactly what you're going to do. Because if free will is the ability to do otherwise, well, you can't do otherwise. Because God knows that it's going to happen that way. So this is an interesting argument that you can have a look at. I'd be keen to chat to some of you about it in a bit. Okay, we looked at arguments for the existence of God, right? We looked at the Kalam argument, okay? So series of events all the way back in time to a beginning. There was a beginning, and that which begins to exist must have a cause. We looked at argument from order, appealing to entropy, right? Laws of the universe. The universe is a very ordered state at the Big Bang, and it's tending towards disorder. Order is imposed by intelligence. All right, and we looked at a couple of arguments from design. We had the watchmaker argument. All right, if you're walking along the beach and you find a watch, you suppose that it's created. Something created it. You make an analogy to human beings, and then that of fine tuning as well. Looking at the laws that govern the universe, they're fine-tuned for the emergence of life. We looked at the problem of evil. Okay, so if God exists, why is there evil and suffering? If a good God exists, why is there evil and suffering? So that could be one we investigate. And we've looked at two theories of mind, haven't we? So we've looked at, I'll just come around this way just because I'm filming it. No worries. We've looked at dualism. So yeah, grab a seat here, Ali, you just do what you need to do. We've looked at dualism, which says there is a substantial difference between the mind and the brain. The mind is this sort of immaterial element that governs and makes decisions for the physical body. And then materialism, which says the brain and the mind are the same thing, they're the brain. And matter's the only substance, and so, that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is just atoms in the brain firing. Okay, so we've got philosophy of mind. And then perhaps the last one is that of simulation theory, right? We made a pretty compelling mathematical argument that we might be living in a simulation, so we have the opportunity to examine that one. Here's some other ideas that we've looked at the first few, but we haven't looked at some of the later ones. That is the distinction between essences. Do essences exist as real things, or are they just made up categories that are useful for us? Ontology, when we were talking about parts and wholes, okay? So we talked about in-cars, we talked about islands, we talked about frogs. identity in the ship of Theseus. What is it that makes something a thing? We have theological determinism today. And then what I've got here, what I've got following is a list of things I would like to talk about in coming weeks. We've got this whole term is dedicated to metaphysics. So for the remainder of the term, we'll see if we can start talking about some of these things. We've got time and causation, modality, numbers. All right, so sort of the philosophy of mathematics. Is mathematics discovered or created? And then as well a hierarchy of being, talking about distinction between plants, humans and animals. Is there, so if any of those later ones are of interest to you, let me know. But I would probably prefer us to choose one of the earlier ones. Okay, so you're choosing one of these arguments because we can take it, like let's say for instance, you're doing philosophy of mind and you're going to take this argument for dualism. All right, it's a pretty compelling argument. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at the premises. All right, the first premise is from Leibniz's law of indiscernibles, right? It says for two things to be the same, they must have the same properties. All right, and talk about why that has to be true. Okay, is there a possible exception to it? Because if one of the premises is false, the conclusion has to be false, right? That's the beauty of logic. Then you look at the next premise. My mind is private, okay? The thoughts and experiences and sensations that go in my mind are not observable to others. They can make inferences about them, but they can't know it and see it and experience it themselves. And last one, my brain is public, okay? So you can make the case that you can look at a brain scan in an fMRI. You could cut the top of someone's head, have a look inside, but that doesn't mean you can have the experiences and sensations that they have. All right, so you can talk about this and build up a case for this argument, right? Build up a case for dualism, but then say, but what about the interaction problem? How is it that this sort of spiritual, immaterial mind interacts with a physical body? All right, you think of like causal events, you know, series of dominoes. How is it this invisible, immaterial, non-composite domino affects the whole series of material events? All right, so that's what we're going to be doing in our assignment. Here's the structure for it. All right, we've got the introduction. The first thing you want to do, and I've said this with the Year 12s, is frame the issue in terms of metaphysics. All right, so all of the Year 12s did this pretty well. It's where you say, you know, metaphysics is the field of philosophy concerned with the fundamental nature of reality. The issue I've chosen, so philosophy of mind or dualism, is a part of metaphysics because it's concerned with the nature of the mind. And so that's like framing it in terms of metaphysics. We're going to put the argument in logical form. Okay, so you don't have to generate that yourself. I've done that for you. But pick in one of those arguments. And then we're going to talk about why is that useful? Well, the reason we put it in logical form, again, to reiterate, if the argument's valid and the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. Now, all of the arguments I've put up there are logically valid. They have logical valid form. So all you need to do then is analyse, are the premises true? All right. So that's the commenting about the utility of logic. Then you just take each premise and you build up a case for it. You talk about possible problems with it. You can talk about possible problems with the argument as a whole. That's happening in the body. And then a comment on the soundness. Okay, so soundness means valid plus truth. If it's valid and true, the argument is what we call sound. All right, and I've got this image of the steel man there because we remember that we've got that fallacy of building up a straw man where we make a weak argument because it's easy to bash. We want to build up the strongest argument we possibly can in order to analyse it. Okay. So that's our assignment that we're going forward with. Okay, so 800 words. You get to choose one, pick one of these arguments, and chat to me about it. It'd be good if we're all doing sort of something different. We can come up with different critiques, different analyses of it. So yeah, we'll hit stop there. Thanks, Aiden.